Montana Territory, January 1887. The wind had teeth that night, sharp and bitter, chasing across the open plain like a thing alive. Snow pressed against the small wagon like fists, and the canvas flapped wildly above the wooden frame. Inside, 20-year-old Roselyn Danner curled her arms tightly around her little brother and sister, trying to keep warmth in their tiny bodies while her own shivered to the bone. They had been left hours ago. Her stepfather, drunk and angry, had shouted something about broken wagon wheels and useless mouths to feed. Then he had ridden off into the storm, promising to return. He never did. Roselyn pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, then to Liam's 4 and 6, both of them pale and limp with cold. She had wrapped them in the last of the blankets, leaving her own shoulders bare beneath her thin coat. Her fingers were stiff. Her toes had gone numb. The storm howled louder now, like it was trying to bury them alive. "I will keep you safe," she whispered, voice trembling. "Just hold on, please." She did not know how much longer they could last. Miles away, Samuel Cade urged his horse through the rising snow, coat collar turned up, hat pulled low. He had been heading to the nearest trading post before the blizzard rolled in, but something maybe pulled him off the trail. He had spotted a crooked wagon wheel half buried in the frost, and then a set of hoofprints disappearing into the white. He found the wagon by a small frozen creek, half collapsed and nearly covered. The horse tethered nearby was dead, frozen standing. His heart kicked hard in his chest. "Hello," he called out, swinging down from the saddle. No answer, just the wind and the creak of ice. He threw open the back flap and froze. A girl hunched over 2 children, her body curved like a shield. Her hair was caked with snow, her lips were blue, her eyes fluttered open barely. She looked up at him as if she were seeing a ghost. "Help them," she croaked. Samuel moved fast. He lifted the children first, wrapping them in his saddle blanket, then turned back for her. She tried to stand but collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. She was so cold it scared him. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his thick wool coat around her shoulders. "You are not dying here," he said, voice low but firm. "You hear me? No one's freezing tonight, not on my watch." She did not answer, but her fingers clutched at his coat like a lifeline. He got them all on his horse, the children in front, Roselyn behind him, her face against his back. His coat was wrapped around them both, his arms holding her steady. The ride to his cabin was slow, near blind, but Samuel knew this land. He had built his life on it, acre by acre, after the war. He had fought for peace, for something solid. He had not expected to find a half-dead girl and 2 little ones in the middle of a storm, but he had never turned his back on anyone in need. When they reached his cabin tucked between the pines, he did not pause. He got the door open, kicked snow off his boots, and carried them all inside like they were his own blood. He laid the children near the fire, then turned and lifted Roselyn into his arms again. "I can walk," she whispered, but her legs buckled when she tried. "I know," he said, not letting go. He set her down gently beside the hearth, propped her up with a pillow, and tucked a second blanket around her shoulders. Then he knelt beside her, close enough she could feel the heat of him. "You are safe now," he said, her eyes filled, but she held them back. "Thank you. Do you have a name?" "Roselyn Danner," she said, voice still raw. "The little ones are Lily and Liam, my stepfather. He left us." Samuel's jaw clenched, but he only nodded. "I am Samuel Cade." He stood and moved to check on the children, stoking the fire higher, then setting a pot of water on the stove. He worked fast but gentle, every movement careful. Roselyn watched him, too tired to speak, but something inside her eased. The children stirred first. Lily cried weakly, and Roselyn reached for her, arms trembling. "They need food," she said. "I will make broth," Samuel replied. "You rest." He fed them spoonfuls of warm broth, then wrapped them close on a cot near the fire. When he finally turned back to her, she was leaning against the wall, eyes heavy. "You need to eat too," he said softly. She nodded, took the tin cup he offered, and sipped slowly. Her hands were shaking, but she did not drop it. "They will be all right," he told her. She looked at the children, then at him. "I do not know what we would have done if you had not found us," he met her gaze. "You do not have to figure that out now. You are here. That is enough." She blinked hard, swallowing the lump in her throat. "You wrapped me in your coat." You were freezing, he said simply. It was the only way to get you warm. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once, her eyes softening. That night she did not sleep much. Neither did he. He sat by the fire, boots off, elbows on his knees, watching over them all. Every now and then she would glance over at him. He did not look away. By morning the storm had passed. The world outside was buried in snow, but the cabin was quiet, warm. Roselyn stood with a blanket draped around her shoulders, watching the sunrise through the window. Samuel stood beside her, holding a mug of coffee in one hand. They are still sleeping, she said. They are safe, he replied. She looked up at him, her eyes clearer now. So are we. He did not smile, but something shifted in his expression, a gentleness, a promise. You are not alone anymore, Roselyn, and for the first time since her mother died, she believed it. The snow had settled heavy along the pine boughs that edged the clearing, muffling the sounds of the world. Morning light crept through the frost-glazed window panes, pale and steady. Inside the cabin, Lily and Liam stirred beneath the quilts, their breathing soft and even. Roselyn had tucked them in again after they woke briefly to eat, then drifted back to sleep without complaint. She stood now near the woodpile, sleeves rolled to her elbows, sorting kindling with careful movements. Samuel watched her from across the room, elbows resting on the edge of the table as he sharpened a small blade with a whetstone. The sound scraped softly through the quiet. He didn't interrupt her work, but when she straightened with a few pieces in her arms, he spoke. You don't need to do that. I know, she said, placing the kindling in the basket near the hearth. But it helps. She crossed to the stove, checking the kettle without asking. Her limbs moved more surely today, though there was still a tentative edge to her footing, like she hadn't quite decided whether this place was temporary or not. Samuel set the knife down. There's a spring behind the ridge where I trap in the fall. When it thaws, I'll show you. Water runs clean all season. Roselyn glanced over, then nodded once. The land out here, it's different than I imagined. You've not been in Montana long. We came up from Kansas late last summer, she said, turning back to the stove. The man who married my mother claimed there'd be work. There wasn't, just debt and storms. She didn't add anything more, and Samuel didn't ask. Instead, he stood and reached for the coat hanging by the door. I'll check the traps near the tree line. Won't be long. She turned, brow creasing. You'll need mittens. Yours are still damp, he paused, surprised. I hung them near the stove earlier, she added. They were stiff with ice. I'll take yours then, if you don't mind. She hesitated, then pulled them from the peg by the fire. They're small. They'll do. Their fingers brushed when he took them. A brief thing, nothing spoken about, but she didn't pull away too fast. Once he was gone, Roselyn moved to the window. The clearing beyond was still blanketed in white, but the sky had gone a clear blue. Smoke curled from the chimney. She leaned her forehead gently against the cold glass and let herself breathe. Behind her, the children stirred again. Liam's voice came first, quiet and uncertain. Where's the man? He's checking his traps, she answered, coming to sit beside the cot. Is he nice? He's been kind to us, she said, brushing hair from his brow. That's more than we've had in a long while. Lily blinked up at her. Will we go back to the wagon? Roselyn's chest tightened. No, sweet pea, we're not going back. Neither child asked about the man who left them. They hadn't since the night he disappeared. Later, when Samuel returned, the wind had picked up again, but the snow held off. He carried 2 rabbits in one hand and a fox pelt in the other. Roselyn was sweeping near the door with a bundle of pine boughs tied at the end of a stick. When she looked up and saw what he carried, her gaze held steady. I can help skin them, she said. I've done it before. He handed her the rabbits, then crouched near the small bench to work on the fox. She settled beside him, pulling a small knife from the block on the shelf. You trap often? Enough to get by. I trade pelts out in Townsend, sometimes Helena. She nodded, fingers moving carefully along the rabbit's hind legs. My mother taught me to prepare meat, said a girl who knows how to feed herself won't ever starve. Samuel didn't speak for a moment. Then, wise woman, she was, Roselyn said softly. She died the year before last. Fever took her in the spring. He looked up, met her eyes briefly, then returned to his work. I'm sorry. She would have liked it here, Roselyn said after a moment. The quiet. The way the trees hold the sky. They worked silently after that, the only sound the scrape of knives against fur and the soft crackle of the fire. When the meat was cleaned and set aside, Samuel rose and lit a lantern from the shelf. The day was already growing dim again. "I'll bring in more wood before it gets dark." "I'll start the stew," Roselyn offered, wiping her hands on her skirt. He paused at the door. "There's dried onions and beans in the top bin, salt pork too, I saw." "I'll make it stretch." When he stepped outside, cold rushed in briefly, then faded behind the door. Roselyn turned back to the hearth, moving with quiet purpose. She diced the onions finely, careful not to waste a flake, then added them to the pot with soaked beans and slivers of meat. As it simmered, the smell filled the small space, rich and warm. The children sat near the fire, playing with a pair of carved animals Samuel had left on the windowsill. When he returned, she didn't need to say anything. He stepped inside, shook the snow from his shoulders, and caught the scent in the air. His eyes met hers. "Smells good." "Thank you," she said. "It's ready." They ate together around the fire. 3 bowls passed between 4 hands. Roselyn fed Lily and Liam first. Samuel waited without impatience, then took his share and ate in silence. The warmth of the meal eased the tightness in Roselyn's belly, and when she looked across the fire at Samuel, she saw something steadier in his face tonight. After the children were tucked in again, she lingered near the window, watching the moon rise behind the trees. Samuel stood a few feet away, drying his hands on a cloth. "Do you sleep upstairs?" she asked. "There's a loft," he said. "I'll stay down here while you're here. You don't have to give up your bed. I'd rather you rest easy." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw the lines around his eyes, the way he carried his weight across his left leg more than his right. "You've been alone a long time." He didn't deny it. "I have too," she said, turning back to the window, "even when I wasn't." He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the heat of him again. She didn't move away. "You're not alone now," he said. Her fingers curled against the windowsill. "I don't know what comes next. Then we'll figure it out together." She didn't answer, not with words, but when he turned and walked away, she stayed at the window, her breath clouding the glass, and let herself believe just a little that he meant it. The following days moved slow and steady, like the melt of icicles after a hard freeze. The storm had passed, but its weight lingered in the drifts piled along the eaves and the crusted sheen on every branch. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the stove spread soft and constant, and Roselyn began to settle into the rhythm of the place without needing to ask which pail held what or where the flint was kept. On the 5th morning, Samuel came in from checking the snare line with a thin trail of blood along his forearm. He didn't mention it, just pulled off his coat and reached for the basin. Roselyn turned from the hearth and crossed the room. "What happened?" Rabbit kicked hard. "Caught me while I was cutting it free." "You ought to clean it properly," she said, already dipping a cloth in the hot water. "Sit down." He didn't argue, just braced his arm on his knee while she pressed the cloth gently to the scrape. "You always this stubborn about tending yourself?" "I don't see the point in fussing." She dabbed a bit harder than necessary. "You don't heal faster by acting like it doesn't hurt." His mouth twitched faintly, but he didn't pull away. "You sound like someone used to patching others up." "I had to be," she said, rinsing the cloth. Lily scraped her knees near every Sunday, and Liam used to fall asleep holding his own bruises like they might vanish if he kept them close. Samuel looked at her, something unreadable in his gaze. "You raised them more than he did, didn't you?" She wrung out the cloth and set it aside. "I tried." "You did more than try, Roselyn." She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. That afternoon, Lily found a wooden box tucked behind the shelf near the stove. Inside were small paper-wrapped bundles and a pair of worn spectacles. She brought it to Roselyn, who opened it carefully. Inside was a set of yellowed pages tied with twine, ink faded but legible. "Is this yours?" she asked Samuel that evening as he brought in a load of split logs. He wiped his hands on his trousers and stepped over. "No, that belonged to my mother. She used to write letters she never mailed, said it helped settle her thoughts." Roselyn ran her fingers over the edge of one paper. "You kept them all this time?" "They're all I've got of her." Lily peered up at him. "Was she kind?" Samuel looked down at her, then nodded once. She was brave. That night, Roselyn sat by the hearth after the children had gone to sleep, turning over the bundle of letters in her lap. Samuel sat across from her, sharpening a chisel with short, steady strokes. "She talk much about your father?" she asked without looking up. "Not after I turned 16. "What happened then?" She stopped, waiting for him to come home. Roselyn set the letters aside. "He left. He died." "In Virginia?" Samuel's tone didn't carry bitterness, but it dropped quiet. "Didn't know it for 3 years. I'm sorry." He nodded once, not looking up from the blade. "You don't have to be. It's part of the land. Things don't always last." Roselyn folded the letters back into the box carefully. "I'd like to read them if you don't mind." "I don't. Just don't expect them to be tidy." "I don't expect anything tidy anymore." The next morning, the sky broke open with clear sun, pale gold on the crusted snow. Steam rose from the roof in slow curls as the cabin warmed. Roselyn stepped outside with a shawl thrown over her shoulders, boots crunching in the snow. Samuel was splitting kindling near the shed, sleeves rolled, breath trailing in the cold. She stood near the fence, watching the sun reach over the ridge. "When the snow melts, what happens?" she asked without turning. He paused, axe still in hand. "You mean with you and the children?" She nodded. "That depends on what you want. I want them safe. I want to stop running." Samuel set the axe down and came to lean against the fence beside her. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that their shoulders might have brushed if either of them shifted an inch. "There's land here, enough space to build something real. You wouldn't have to leave." "I don't have anything to trade, no dowry." "No claim. You've got hands that work, a mind that doesn't quit, and 2 little ones who look at you like the whole world." She turned her face toward him. "This isn't something you offer out of pity." "It isn't," he said. "I want you here, Roselyn, not just because you need shelter. Because I want a life that means something, and I think that life might start with you." She didn't answer right away. Her breath came in clouds and her fingers tightened on the shawl. "I don't know how to trust it yet." "You don't have to yet," he said. "But I'll be here when you do." She looked at him, then not like someone uncertain, but like someone measuring truth. "I won't promise easy days," she said. "I wouldn't believe you if you did." She smiled, faint and real, then turned back toward the cabin. That evening, as the sun dipped and the shadows grew long, Roselyn set out 2 cups of coffee and sat across from Samuel at the table. The children were asleep, the fire low, the air quiet. "I want to stay," she said, fingers around the mug, "not just through the thaw. I want to build something here." Samuel nodded once, slow and certain. "Then we'll begin." And they did. The last of the ice broke loose from the eaves in long, wet sheets, falling with a hushed thud into the thawing earth. March had come, not with fanfare, but with the quiet consistency of warmer wind and the slow greening of the pine needles. The cabin's clearing held patches of bare ground now, soft with mud and scattered pine cones. The air smelled of wet bark and wood smoke. Roselyn stood at the edge of the vegetable plot behind the cabin, her skirts hitched above her boots, turning the soil with the old iron spade Samuel had pulled from his shed. She paused to wipe her forehead with the back of her wrist, then worked her boot into the shovel's worn blade again. She favored her left side, slightly old, bruising from the wagon ride, but didn't complain. Each stroke of the spade was deliberate, carving space for something new. Samuel approached from the barn, carrying a coil of fencing wire and a small hammer tucked into his belt. He stopped beside her, tilting his head toward the line of stakes she'd driven into the soil earlier that morning. "You laid them straight," he said. "I used the string and your level board, just like you showed me." He nodded, eyeing the row. "You've got a good eye for lines," she straightened, resting both hands on the spade handle. "I used to help my mother measure fabric. She'd say a crooked hem shames the whole dress." She was right. They stood in the warming sun for a moment, the wind combing gently through the trees. A hawk circled high above the ridge, casting a brief shadow over the field. "Townsend's less than a day if the trails are dry," Samuel said after a pause. "I was thinking of riding in next week." Roselyn glanced over. "You need supplies." "I was thinking of registering a land claim," her hands stilled on the spade. "You own this place already. I do, but there's 40 acres east of the creek that opened up in February. I could file for it. You want to expand? I want to make room, he said, his voice steady, for more than just me. She lowered her gaze to the turned earth. The weight of what he said didn't unsettle her, it settled into her like a root finding soil. I'd like to plant onions and cabbage this year, she said. Lily eats cabbage raw if you let her. I've got a corn sack in the loft, seed from last season, should still be good. She nodded, then met his eyes. What would I be if I stayed? He didn't answer right away. Then, whatever you want to be, but if you're asking whether I want you beside me, I do. Roselyn stepped closer, not rushed, her shadow mingling with his on the ground. I wasn't raised to expect anything lasting. I wasn't raised to ask for it. She let her hand rest lightly on his arm, just above the rolled sleeve. But you're asking now, he turned to face her fully. I'm not offering a soft life, just an honest one. Shared, she didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. I want that. Later that day, Liam followed Samuel to the shed, trailing behind with a stick he used to poke at clumps of snow. Samuel handed him a small wooden mallet and showed him how to hammer nails into a board without splitting the grain. Liam's tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, and when he managed 3 straight taps, he looked up, wide-eyed. Can I keep it? It's yours, Samuel said, brushing sawdust from the boy's hair. But you've got to help me build the chicken coop if you're going to be a carpenter. Liam nodded solemnly and tucked the mallet under his arm like a pistol. Inside the cabin, Roselyn laid Lily down for a nap, smoothing the quilt over her legs. She lingered by the cot afterward, watching the girl's chest rise and fall. She didn't think about the wagon or the cold or the man who had scattered them like unwanted seed across snow. She thought of the fence post line she and Samuel had marked and the way the soil had turned soft under her boots. That night they sat close by the hearth, not touching, but near enough that the warmth passed between them. Roselyn rested her elbows on her knees, watching the fire with a quiet that wasn't empty. Samuel passed her a folded square of muslin. Inside it was a silver hairpin, simple and plain, the kind a man might buy in town if he had a purpose in mind. I was going to wait until spring proper, he said, but there's nothing cold left in me. She opened the cloth, fingers brushing the pin's curve. I don't have anything to give you, she said. You already gave me your trust. That's more than I thought I'd ever earn. She looked at him, long and steady. Then I'll give you the rest of it. If you want it, I do. She leaned closer then, slow and sure, and let her forehead rest against his. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the snow had melted in strips across the clearing, leaving space for roots to take hold. The wind had softened. The world was making room. The wind carried the scent of damp bark and new grass, and along the slope behind the cabin, wild crocuses had begun to push their way through patches of soft earth. Roselyn knelt beneath the cottonwoods, pressing her palms into the loam to check for frost. The ground held warmth now, slow but steady, the kind that lingers. Samuel had gone to fell a birch that leaned too close to the barn roof, but she could hear the rhythm of his axe echoing faintly through the trees. Lily and Liam sat on a blanket near the porch, threading bits of twine through pine cones for the birds. Their laughter rolled light on the breeze, unguarded in a way Roselyn hadn't heard since their mother's last spring. She let her hands rest in her lap for a moment and watched the way sunlight caught in Lily's curls, and how Liam squinted with his tongue between his teeth as he worked. She stood, brushing her palms on her apron, and walked the ridge path toward the sound of Samuel's axe. The birch had come down clean, its pale bark peeling in long ribbons. Samuel crouched beside the trunk, stripping limbs into manageable lengths. His shirt clung to his back, and a fresh line of sawdust powdered his forearms. You said you'd save the tall stump, Roselyn said. He glanced up. I did. I was thinking we could set the wash basin on it this summer, keep the water off the ground. He leaned back on his heels. That was my thought, too. She stepped around the trunk and sat on a boulder nearby. You ever think about the kind of man your father was? I try not to make guesses, Samuel said. He left too little behind. I used to wonder what kind of woman my mother might have been if she'd been loved right. Samuel set down the axe and wiped his forehead with the crook of his arm. She raised a daughter who knows her worth. That says something. Roselyn folded her hands around her knees. You think it's strange what we've built so far? No, he said. Strange would have been letting it pass by. He stood then, walked to where she sat, and offered a hand. She took it and let him pull her to her feet. I saw a pair of does near the pond this morning, he said. Never seen them come that close before. Maybe they know it's safe here now. They started back toward the cabin, walking slow. She didn't let go of his hand. That evening, she found Liam asleep with his head on Samuel's leg, the boy's thumb still tucked in the crook of his mouth. Samuel didn't move, just rested a hand lightly on Liam's back and looked over at her with something soft in his eyes. Not pity, not obligation, just quiet belonging. Roselyn brought him a cup of warm cider and knelt beside the hearth. You ever think about your own children? He looked down at Liam, then back at her. I never thought I'd have the right to. You do. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together without hesitation. I want to marry you, Roselyn, not down the road, not when it's easier. Now, she exhaled slowly. You sure? I've been sure since the first morning I saw you watching the snow melt like it owed you something. She laughed, then pressed her forehead to his shoulder. Then yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. They wed the following Sunday, just past noon, in the clearing behind the cabin. The preacher from Townsend rode up with his wife in a cart full of spring blossoms. Samuel wore his cleanest shirt and a vest Roselyn had mended at the seams. Roselyn stood barefoot in the grass, her mother's old pin tucked into her braid. Lily wove flowers into a crown and placed it on Roselyn's head before the vows. Liam clung to Samuel's side, holding the ring wrapped in a square of muslin. When the preacher asked if they would love and keep each other through all things, Roselyn smiled so fully it lit the whole clearing. I already have, she said. They kissed with the sun warm on their cheeks, and the wind carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Afterward, they shared bread and cider on the porch, and when the preacher's cart disappeared past the edge of the trees, Samuel lifted Roselyn into his arms and carried her across the threshold. That night, with the children asleep and the fire low, Roselyn stood at the window in her nightdress, watching the stars. Samuel came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. She leaned back into him, resting her hands over his. I used to count the days like they were things to survive, she said. And now, he asked, she turned in his arms and rested her cheek against his chest. Now I measure them by peace. He kissed the top of her head. Then we've done something right. They lay together in the loft, wrapped in quilts in each other, neither needing to speak. The cabin creaked gently in the night, and the wind passed over the roof like a lullaby. Years passed, and the land grew under their hands. The garden flourished. Chickens pecked in the yard. A cradle Samuel carved from birch wood stood beside the hearth, and the child who slept in it had Roselyn's eyes and Samuel's quiet steadiness. Liam built a tree swing behind the barn. Lily carried wildflowers in her pockets and asked to learn her letters beside her mother at the table each morning. One evening, as twilight settled and smoke curled from the chimney, Roselyn stood beside Samuel by the fence line. The sky was painted in soft streaks of orange and lavender, and the air smelled of lilac and tilled soil. She reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. I never thought I'd call a place mine, she said. This isn't just yours, he said. It's ours, and it was their land. Their life, built not from ease, but from every hard one day that came before, and from that day forward nothing ever scattered them again.